In the ancient land of Israel, where prophets roamed and uncommon miracles were not uncommon, one man stood out for his unwavering faith and miraculous deeds: Elisha, an understudy to the legendary prophet Elijah, Elijah's successor. Elisha's life story reads as an epic plot of a fantasy story, rich with divine encounters and supernatural events that continued even after his death. Some of these supernatural events include an entire army blinded because of his prayer, dividing a river with the mantle of his predecessor, healing the water of Jericho, made an axe head float and his bones resurrecting a man, an after-death miracle, the first of its kind ever recorded. Before we continue, please like and subscribe to this channel for more content like this. Moving on. This supernatural event marked as Elisha's final miracle was indeed a jaw-dropper, seeing that it had never been recorded until now. Elisha, the prophet of miracles, had come to the end of his days. After a life filled with divine wonders and acts of compassion, his health had begun to fail him. Despite his declining condition, his faith remained unshaken, and his final days were spent imparting wisdom to those who came seeking his counsel. Surrounded by his disciples, he breathed his last, his soul departing in peace, and he was laid to rest in a tomb, honored by the people of Israel who had witnessed the power of God through him. He was one of the greatest prophets who was seen as the bridge between the supernatural and the physical. Years passed, and Elisha's tomb became a silent testament to his extraordinary life. It was during this time that a group of Israelites found themselves caught in a dire situation. Moabite raiders, known for their sudden and violent attacks, had invaded the land. One particular group tasked with burying a recently deceased man was suddenly ambushed by these marauders. In their panic and desperation, the men sought a quick solution to escape the imminent danger. In their haste, they stumbled upon Elisha's tomb. With no time to spare, they decided to lay the body within the nearest shelter they could find, the resting place of the great prophet. As they hurriedly placed the body inside and prepared to flee, something miraculous occurred. The moment the dead man's body touched the bones of Elisha, life surged back into him. He revived, stood up, and walked out of the tomb, leaving the raiders and his companions in utter astonishment. The resurrected man, once a corpse, was now a living testament to the enduring power of God's anointing on Elisha. Word of this miraculous event spread like wildfire, reigniting the faith of the people and reminding them of the God who transcends death itself. The fear and despair caused by the Moabite invasion were overshadowed by the awe and reverence for the miracle that had just unfolded. In the aftermath, the resurrected man shared his incredible experience, recounting the moment he touched Elisha's bones and felt life return to his body. His story, coupled with the eyewitness accounts of those who had buried him, became a powerful testimony of God's power working through Elisha even in death. This miracle bolstered the people's faith, serving as a potent reminder that God's presence and power are never confined to the bounds of human existence. Elisha's final miracle was more than a moment of divine intervention. It was a profound declaration of the enduring impact of a life wholly devoted to God. The prophet, who had once been Elijah's faithful servant, continued to serve as a beacon of God's miraculous power even from beyond the grave. His story, now intertwined with the extraordinary event of resurrection, became a timeless legend, inspiring generations to trust in the boundless possibilities of divine grace. Considering who Elisha was before he encountered the supernatural life, Elisha lived in the 9th century BCE, during the reign of King Jehoash of Israel. He was an ordinary and simple hard-working farmer who plowed and lived in Abel Mahola, laboring tirelessly under the scorching sun. From dawn until dusk, he drove 12 pairs of oxen, their hooves churning the rich soil in preparation for a bountiful harvest. Elisha was not just a farmer, he was a master of the land, understanding every nuance of the earth he tilled. His hands, calloused and strong, bore testament to years of hard work and dedication. Little did he know that his unwavering commitment to his daily toil was about to be interrupted by a call to a higher purpose. One fateful day, as Elisha guided his oxen across the field, a figure appeared on the horizon. It was Elijah, the great prophet, whose deeds and confrontations with kings were legendary and well known for calling fire from heaven. Elisha's origin story begins with his encounter with Elijah. Elijah was on his way to the wilderness to hide from Jezebel, the queen of Israel, who sought to kill him. As Elijah was walking, he met a group of prophets who were being oppressed by the king of Israel. Elijah asked them why they were afraid, and they replied that Jezebel had sought to kill them. Elijah then instructed them to hide themselves in the Kerith River, where they would be fed by the Lord. As Elijah continued his journey, he met a widow who was gathering sticks to build a fire to cook her last meal for her and her son. Elijah asked her to bring him a jar of oil and a bowl of flour. The widow did as instructed, and Elijah then poured the oil over a jar of flour, which miraculously never ran out. This miracle demonstrated Elijah's power and his ability to provide for those in need. After Elijah's encounter with the widow, he met Elisha, whom God said was going to take his place when he was gone. Without a word of warning, Elijah approached and threw his mantle over Elisha's shoulders, a symbolic act that carried profound significance, symbolizing that Elisha would inherit Elijah's prophetic mantle, or a sign of handing over the prophetic ordinance to the next in line. Elisha instantly understood the gravity of the moment. The mantle was not just a garment, it was a mantle of prophetic authority, an invitation to leave behind the familiar and embrace the extraordinary. Elisha's response was immediate and decisive because he understood what that act meant. So he slaughtered his oxen, burning the wooden plow to cook their meat, which he then shared with the people. This act was more than a farewell feast, it was a definitive severance from his past life. By destroying the very tools of his trade, Elisha ensured there was no turning back. With a heart full of faith and determination, he left everything behind to follow Elijah, dedicating his life to serving God and learning from the prophet. This radical decision marked the beginning of Elisha's journey as a prophet, a path that would lead him to perform miracles and change lives, forever etching his name in the annals of history. Elisha's years with Elijah were a crucible of humility and profound learning. From the moment he left his plow behind, Elisha devoted himself wholly to serving the great prophet. Known as the one who poured water on the hands of Elijah, as stated in 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 11, Elisha embraced his role with a servant's heart, eager to absorb the wisdom and strength of his mentor. Each day, he attended to Elijah's needs, ensuring that the prophet could focus on his divine mission. This menial task symbolized a deeper submission and willingness to learn, laying the foundation for Elisha's future as a prophet. Throughout their journey together, Elisha witnessed the astonishing power of God working through Elijah. He stood by as Elijah called down fire from heaven, vanquishing the prophets of Baal in a dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel. He saw Elijah's unflinching courage as he confronted kings and spoke truth to power, no matter the personal cost. Elisha marveled at the miracles that flowed from Elijah's faith, each one a testament to God's sovereignty and might. These experiences were not just lessons, but transformative encounters that shaped Elisha's understanding of what it meant to be God's chosen messenger. As Elisha absorbed these lessons, his faith and understanding deepened. He realized that being a prophet was not just about performing miracles, but about embodying a life of unwavering trust in God. Elisha's time with Elijah was a season of preparation, refining his character and honing his spiritual sensitivity. Every confrontation, every miracle, every moment of divine judgment he witnessed reinforced the sacred responsibility he would one day inherit. This period of apprenticeship was crucial, equipping Elisha with the strength and wisdom needed to continue the prophetic legacy after Elijah's departure. In these formative years, Elisha transformed from a humble servant into a powerful prophet, ready to carry forth the mantle of Elijah and impact the world with God's miraculous power. Although Elisha was the successor for Elijah, he had to learn. He had to see how his predecessor handled the truth and power and how he stood for God. Even after being chosen, he had to serve Elijah, to the point where he became as bold as Elijah, even bold than he was. He began to show the same character traits that his predecessor had, how he talked, prophesied, and spoke out judgment. But before he had the floor all to himself, he had to witness the ascension of his master. The time had come for Elijah, the great prophet of Israel, to be taken up to heaven. As he and his faithful servant Elisha journeyed from Gilgal, Elijah's departure loomed large in the air. Aware that his end was near, Elijah tried to dissuade Elisha from following him, saying, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha, resolute in his loyalty, responded, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." This scene repeated itself as Elijah continued to Jericho and then to the Jordan, each time testing Elisha's dedication, and each time Elisha steadfastly refused to leave his side. At the Jordan River, Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. The river parted, allowing both men to cross on dry ground. This miracle was not just a display of divine power, but also a foreshadowing of what was to come for Elisha. Upon crossing, Elijah turned to Elisha and asked, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elisha's response was bold and filled with faith. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." This was not a request for twice the power, but rather for the firstborn share, a recognition of Elisha's desire to continue and expand Elijah's prophetic ministry. In ancient times, mostly in Israel, on a father's deathbed, he shares his properties and belongings among his children, mostly sons, but he gives twice as much to the firstborn son because they are regarded as the strength of the father, and are mostly empowered with twice as much to continue the father's legacy and do better, mostly to continue from where the father stopped. Elisha was claiming a position for himself, a position Elijah had not directly given to him. Elijah replied, "You have asked a difficult thing, yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise it will not." As they walked and talked, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha watched in awe, crying out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." As Elijah ascended till he saw him no more, he rented his clothes in 2 pieces. This act symbolizes the end of one era and the welcoming of a new one. Elijah's mantle fell to the ground, a tangible sign of the prophetic authority being passed to Elisha. With a heart full of both sorrow and determination, Elisha picked up Elijah's mantle, which signifies a transition of power from his mentor to him. Returning to the banks of the Jordan, he stood before the river and struck the water with the cloak, just as Elijah had done. He called out, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The waters parted once again, and Elisha crossed over. This act was Elisha's first miracle, a powerful testament that the spirit of Elijah now rested upon him. It was also a public confirmation that God's power continued to work through him. Plus, it also signified that Elisha had received the firstborn son's inheritance, that is twice as much as the others, and a sign to show for that was he continued from where Elijah stopped by performing Elijah's last miracle as his first. On the other side of the Jordan, 50 prophets from Jericho who had been watching from a distance saw Elisha perform this miracle. They acknowledged that the spirit of Elijah now rested on Elisha and bowed down to him. They offered to search for Elijah, thinking perhaps the Spirit of the Lord had set him down on some mountain or in some valley, but Elisha knew that Elijah was now with God and insisted they not go. However, after their persistent urging, Elisha relented, and the men searched for 3 days but found no trace of Elijah. Elisha's miraculous parting of the Jordan was just the beginning. The 50 prophets and all who witnessed these events understood that Elisha had indeed inherited a double portion of Elijah's spirit. His ministry would go on to be filled with even more miracles and acts of power, continuing and expanding the legacy of his mentor. This transfer of prophetic authority marked the beginning of a new chapter for Israel, with Elisha stepping fully into the role ordained for him, demonstrating that God's power was still very much at work among his people. This scene marked the beginning of Elisha's ministry and leadership. With the double blessings from Elijah, Elisha performed some really strange miracles. Very strange miracles that some of them were never replicated. To make it even more interesting, Elijah performed 8 outstanding miracles that are on the top list of epic shows of power in the Bible, but Elisha, having double of what Elijah operated with, performed twice as many miracles, of which some are just pure show of God's power. Elijah's miracles are: 1. Causing a drought. 2. Provision for the widow of Zarephath. 3. Raising the widow's son. 4. Calling down fire on Mount Carmel. 5. Ending the drought. 6. divine provision in the wilderness. 7. Parting the Jordan River. 8. Calling down fire on 2 groups of soldiers. The miracles of Elisha are mind-blowing, and the last one was out of this world. It was God showing that he can use a man dead or alive to show his power on earth. Elisha's notable miracles include: Number 1. Parting the Jordan River. After Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elisha found himself alone, holding Elijah's mantle. He returned to the Jordan River, struck the water with the cloak, and called out, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The river miraculously parted, allowing him to cross on dry ground. This powerful act not only demonstrated that the spirit of Elijah rested on Elisha, but also marked the beginning of his prophetic ministry with a divine endorsement. Number 2. Healing the water of Jericho. Upon arriving in Jericho, the people approached Elisha with a problem. Their water supply was contaminated and caused death. Elisha requested a new bowl filled with salt. He went to the spring, threw in the salt, and declared that the Lord had healed the water. From that moment, the water was purified and no longer caused harm. This miracle underscored Elisha's role as a bearer of God's restorative power. Number 3. Curse of the she-bears. As Elisha traveled to Bethel, a group of boys came out of the town and mocked him, shouting, "Go on up, you bald head." Offended by their disrespect, Elisha called down a curse in the name of the Lord. Immediately, 2 she-bears emerged from the woods and mauled 42 of the youths. This severe response highlighted the seriousness of mocking God's prophet and the respect due to divine authority. Number 4. Providing water for the army. During a campaign against Moab, the combined armies of Israel, Judah, and Edom found themselves without water in the desert. They sought Elisha's help, and he instructed them to dig ditches throughout the valley. By morning, the ditches were miraculously filled with water, even though there was no rain. This divine provision not only saved the armies, but also demonstrated God's power to provide in desperate situations. Number 5. Multiplying the widow's oil. A widow deeply in debt and facing the loss of her sons to slavery appealed to Elisha for help. Elisha asked her to gather as many empty jars as she could from her neighbors. He then instructed her to pour her small amount of oil into the jars. Miraculously, the oil kept flowing until every jar was filled. She sold the oil, paid off her debts, and had enough left for her family's needs, showcasing God's abundant provision. Number 6. Raising the Shunammite's son. The Shunammite woman, who had shown great hospitality to Elisha, was blessed with a son as foretold by the prophet. When the boy later died suddenly, she laid him on Elisha's bed and sought the prophet's help. Elisha returned with her, prayed, and stretched himself out on the child, who then sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. This resurrection affirmed God's power over life and death and Elisha's prophetic authority. Number 7. Purifying poisonous stew. During a famine, the sons of the prophets were preparing a stew when one of them accidentally added poisonous gourds. The men cried out in distress after realizing the stew was lethal. Elisha asked for some flour, which he threw into the pot, making the stew safe to eat. This miracle highlighted Elisha's role in ensuring the safety and well-being of his followers through divine intervention. Number 8. Feeding 100 men. A man brought Elisha 20 loaves of barley bread and some ears of grain during a time of scarcity. Elisha instructed that the food be given to the 100 men present. Despite the small amount, everyone ate and had leftovers, as Elisha had prophesied. This act of multiplication demonstrated God's provision and prefigured the miracles of feeding the multitudes seen in the New Testament. Number 9. Healing Naaman's leprosy. Naaman, a commander of the Syrian army, came to Elisha seeking a cure for his leprosy. Elisha sent a messenger to tell Naaman to wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Initially indignant, Naaman's servants convinced him to follow the prophet's instructions. When he did, his flesh was restored and he was cleansed. This miracle highlighted the importance of humility and obedience in receiving God's blessings. Number 10. Cursing Gehazi with leprosy. Gehazi, Elisha's servant, deceitfully took gifts from Naaman after Elisha had refused them. When confronted, Gehazi lies to Elisha. As punishment for his greed and dishonesty, Elisha cursed him, and Gehazi was struck with Naaman's leprosy. This act served as a stern warning against deceit and corruption, emphasizing the need for integrity in serving God. Number 11. Floating axe head. While the sons of the prophets were building a new place to live, one of them accidentally dropped a borrowed iron axe head into the river. Distraught, he told Elisha, who cut a stick and threw it into the water, causing the axe head to float. This miracle, though seemingly small, showed God's concern for the everyday problems of his people and Elisha's ability to meet those needs. Number 12. Blinding the Aramean army. When the Aramean army surrounded the city to capture Elisha, he prayed to God to strike them with blindness. God answered, and the soldiers were blinded. Elisha then led them to Samaria, where their sight was restored. This miracle demonstrated God's protection over Elisha and his ability to turn the plans of enemies into opportunities for his glory. Number 13. Restoring sight to the Aramean army. After leading the blind Aramean soldiers into Samaria, Elisha prayed for their sight to be restored. Once their eyes were opened, they found themselves in the midst of their enemies. Instead of being killed, they were fed and sent back to their master, leading to a cessation of hostilities. This act of mercy and grace highlighted the power of God's peace and forgiveness. Number 14. Prophesying the end of the siege of Samaria. During the Aramean siege of Samaria, the city suffered from severe famine. Elisha prophesied that by the next day, food would be plentiful and affordable. That night, the Lord caused the Aramean army to hear sounds of chariots and horses, causing them to flee and abandon their supplies. The prophecy was fulfilled, showcasing God's power to deliver his people in dire circumstances. Number 15. Restoring the Shunammite's land. After spending 7 years in Philistia due to a famine, the Shunammite woman returned to find her land taken. Elisha's servant Gehazi was recounting Elisha's miracles to the king when she arrived to plead her case. Moved by her story and Gehazi's testimony, the king restored her land and the income it had produced during her absence. This miracle illustrated God's justice and the rewards of faithfulness. Number 16. Posthumous miracle. Even after Elisha's death, his influence continued. This posthumous miracle shows the enduring power of God's anointing on Elisha. This miracle reveals Elisha's holiness and God's ability to still work wonders with his servants either dead or alive. Elisha's life was a testament to faith, obedience, and the power of God. From his humble beginnings as a farmer to his extraordinary ministry filled with miracles, Elisha's story is one of transformation and divine purpose. He served as a bridge between Elijah's fiery ministry and the continued prophetic tradition in Israel, ensuring that God's voice remained active among his people. The miracle performed after his death serves as a profound reminder that God's power transcends human limitations. Elisha's legacy is one of hope and assurance that faithfulness to God yields enduring impact. His story inspires believers to seek God's presence and power in their own lives, trusting that, like Elisha, they too can be vessels of divine intervention. If you enjoyed this video, kindly like and subscribe to this channel for more content. God bless you.